Let's talk about perspective. If you're familiar with my work, you'll understand that some of my talks are not informational. In one sense, none of my talks are informational, but some of them are much more of a direct experiential pointing. This is one of those. So, as you watch, as you listen, don't try to collect information. Don't try to understand what I'm saying, but rather look into your own experience with how I'm pointing. Look into your own immediate visual field. Listen to the sounds around you, within you. Feel the way the body feels as you engage this material, this video, and you'll get the most out of it. So we're going to talk about perspective. Perspective is an interesting thing. In one sense, you could say that at a deep level of thought-based processing, we're always trying to hold a certain perspective. Now, the perspective we hold might shift and change. We might not even notice the transition between shifting from one perspective to another perspective, and yet the tendency to form a perspective, to look from a certain view or from a certain standpoint, is very fundamental to the remainder of our thought processing. Now, I want to make a distinction here that the tendency to make a perspective, to form a perspective, to look from a perspective, although it is deeply rooted in our thought processing, it has nothing to do with our true nature. So true nature, let's say the unfiltered, the unconditioned, which is here right now, is actually not affected by that. So if anything, what I'm doing in this video is just redirecting attention from that which is conditioned by perspective, bound by perspective, structured on top of a fundamental perspective, to that which is completely free of perspective altogether. When that happens, when we become aware of the unconditioned, or that which has no perspective or requires no perspective, there's a range of experiences, there's a range of our perception of what happened or what's happening. On one end of that spectrum, it can go completely unnoticed or almost unnoticed. We can touch into something that is completely unconditioned by the mind and essentially overlook it. In one way of speaking, that's actually happening all the time, but we can have more of a direct knowing of it, but that knowing is very quickly overshadowed or clouded by the movement of mind and thought. So occasionally we do touch in, or perhaps frequently, to this unconditioned truth, unconditioned experience, and don't quite realize it. Or maybe we know something happened, but we have no clue what it was, and we just move on. Somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, we may have an experience that is quite profound. It can be almost what you might describe as mind-altering, where the usual perspectives dissolve, and yet something is completely aware. There's a knowing that's beyond any conception, and even a knowing that's beyond any point of view or formulation of perspective or even perception, depending on how deep this experience goes. Now, on the far end of this spectrum, there can be an actual letting go. Now, I'm not sure if I can tell you exactly how that happens, or whether you let go or something lets go of you, but I can tell you it does happen. And the more you expose yourself to this kind of material, the more you expose yourself to self-inquiry, the more you expose yourself to questioning the most fundamental truths that you hold to be defining of reality, of what you are, what reality is, etc., the more likely this is to happen. So, one way of saying what that is like is that which holds the perspectives, that which feels like it's defined by perspectives, that which feels like you is fundamentally altered. Or I might even say part of it, or some aspect of it that felt like you, is completely dissolved. This would be called awakening, or perhaps it would be a deeper insight beyond awakening. Some people would call it a second awakening or a further awakening. It doesn't really matter what it's called, but something goes and doesn't come back. Some belief structure, some perceptual filter that was defining reality is literally released, dissolved, seen to be an illusion. Now, where experience occurs on this spectrum doesn't actually matter in the grand scheme of things. What matters more is where your heart is, where your intention is. And if you keep at it, keep exposing yourself to material, whether it's books or videos, by people who, again and again, show you how to reorient to your own deepest truth, your own experiential truth beyond filters, beyond thoughts, beyond beliefs. It will happen. All of these experiences will occur. So I'm not too concerned with the depth of the immediate experience or to encourage anyone to give themselves badges based on how deep their experience was, etc. This can be a distraction. It does happen with some people where it's almost like you collect mind-blowing experiences or psychedelic experiences, etc. And that's okay, of course, but understand that what we're pointing at here is not at the level of experience. It's not in the realm of experience. So just let the process show you how it unfolds, rather than having a preconceived idea about one way of experiencing unfiltered reality being the right way, the best way, the deepest way. It's not that big of a deal. What is a bigger deal is how open-hearted, vulnerable, honest, and willing to question your own beliefs, your own perceptions, your own perspectives you are. The more willing you are, the smoother this typically goes. Now, that's all from your perspective, from the human perspective or the individual perspective, or the perspective of the agent or the intention. But there's a whole other dimension to this that really has nothing to do with you at all anyway. And it can tap you on the shoulder anytime it wants to. And it taps people on the shoulder who have never been exposed to any kind of non-dual material or awakening type of discussions or meditation or mindfulness practices or any of it. It can just happen. But once you've gotten yourself to the point where you intentionally turn toward the process, then you're in a good place. Because even those for whom this happens spontaneously initially, there's still a lot of work to do afterward, turning toward the realization intentionally, being willing to be opened more and more and more. So whether that occurs before or after an initial awakening, doesn't matter that much. What matters is at some point you give yourself to this process of unbinding from the false identity and orienting to what is not conditioned. So, with all of that said, how do we get behind the tendency to form perspective right now? It's a little tricky because it's subtle, but most things in this area of work are really about clear seeing. So a willingness to even see the perspective in the first place is key. Without that, again, it's a matter of luck almost. So what is your perspective? What are your personal narratives? I talk about this a lot. Who you are, where you're coming from, where you're going, what's important to you, what's not important to you, what you're excited about, what you're afraid of. All of these perspectives are valuable to investigate. And once you're comfortable investigating those perspectives, often the next stop is the emotional landscape. This can be a big barrier for some people. And in the deeper realms of the emotion body, I would say it's a pretty big challenge for almost everyone, at least at first. But it's not complicated. It's just about a willingness. And a simple question to get yourself in the habit of asking is simply, what am I feeling here? Start with the narrative. This is what's happening. So-and-so said so-and-so, or there was a breakup, or I was disappointed about this or that. And then ask yourself, what am I feeling about that? And a surprising amount of our inner thought structure is geared towards saying, well, I'm not really upset about it because I know that later on things will change and, there'll be other situations and opportunities and so forth. So it's pretty easy to sort of think our way past it without actually feeling into it. And sometimes that's important. It's sometimes important just to have an empowering perspective rather than a disempowering perspective in life. But usually you start to feel when the body's telling you there's something to feel here, that there is something deeper than just telling yourself a positive story about what's happening. And when that's tugging at you, the feelings, the sensations, it's a great time to ask, what am I feeling? Oh, I'm feeling disappointment. I'm feeling frustration. What's underneath that? Well, I'm frustrated and disappointed because I feel like I lost some validation from so-and-so. Or I'm worried that I won't be viewed the same way by that person or that group in the future. I'm afraid I'll lose approval. So there's some fear under there. And then associated with that, there may be a fear of loneliness, a fear of humiliation. This is how you get down in the emotion body. Just feel into it. And then ask, well, what am I feeling? And it may be quite opaque at first. You may get a lot of thought answers saying, oh, I'm not feeling anything, or I don't know what I'm feeling, or whatever. But keep asking, keep feeling in gently. Don't make up stories about it. Don't make something be there that's not. But again, if you're feeling it, especially if it feels contracted, there's probably an emotion there. So what is it? Confusion, disorientation. Sometimes these lead us to these experiences of frustration. So just being willing to see what you're processing is hugely helpful. And often it doesn't require much more than just that, just seeing it. Oh, I'm feeling envy. Oh, I'm feeling loneliness and fear of loneliness. Oh, I'm feeling regret. I regret doing XYZ. The beauty of this is once you're aware of the emotion and you're feeling it, you start to become aware of how it's affecting your interactions with other people, with life, with yourself. And you see, wow, okay, there's nothing really to fix here, but the clear seeing is going to adjust my interactions with others naturally. Sometimes you see it after the fact. But the point I'm making here is this isn't complex. What it requires is vulnerability and honesty and authenticity with yourself. What it doesn't require is sorting it all out, figuring out what you're going to do about it, making amends, changing this, changing that. Practical aspects of this will come into play, of course. But in these moments when we're just dropping in, feeling in, it's more about feeling, acknowledging, and honesty. So I recommend spending time doing this. Now, that's not the final stop. Once we're clarifying a lot in the emotion body, reactivity's calmed down. If you're interested in reactivity, equanimity, look at my equanimity playlist. There's a lot of approaches for that. That's deep stage emotion body work. But when we get through that, there are these very fundamental perspectives that seem perhaps unrelated to the emotion body or unrelated to the narratives, but they actually underpin the more personal perspectives. You could say that these are sort of impersonal. And they're things like very fundamental beliefs and perspectives, things like, I'm here looking at that over there. I know, very simple, very binary, but it is a perspective. When I'm looking at the flower, the window, the painting, my hands, there's a sense that there's someone looking at something, right? That's a perspective. It's a fundamental perspective in our mental processing. That's fine. Just like with the narratives, just like with the emotion body work, just see it. Don't try to struggle with it or remove it. But you do have to experience the truth of, oh, it feels like I'm looking through a perspective, through a lens of self and other, here and there. The view and the object that's being viewed. Now, once you see that, there are a lot of different ways you can approach deconstructing it, dissolving it, or just seeing through the illusion. And you may not have any sense that there is an illusion here. You may feel like, oh, this is just how it is. Of course. It also may feel like, I'm afraid to dissolve this, because where the hell am I going to go? What happens to me when the sense of self and other collapses? Well, if you've come this far, why don't you go ahead and find out? But it can be scary at times. So, how do we do this? Well, again, first clearly see the degree to which you can experience this perspective, this view as a mental process, as something that's being produced rather than something that's just there. Do you sense that? Again, we're talking about subtle stuff, but we're also talking about what's right in front of your face. I want you to look into the visual field as you do this. Do you see how maybe you can just sense that there's this layer of overlay of me or sight viewing that or the scene. And there's also this overlay of distance, a seeming distance between me and that. Can you perceive that there's this overlay? That maybe that's a processing rather than something actually there? This step alone might take you some time, so keep coming back to it if it's not clear. Or at least if it's not starting to loosen up your perspective. If it's starting to loosen up your perspective where you kind of say, yeah, I do see how there's a bit of processing going on here. It's making it look like there's an over there and an over here. I can't see how it is without that because I'm so used to looking through it. How else could it be? That's fine. That doubt can still be there. Or just the sort of feeling of I don't know where else to look. That's fine. But notice it. Notice that, oh, this is the mind saying this. It's showing it this way, like there's a projector and a screen. Once you are able to discern that, that's great. That's an important step. You may not understand the mechanism and you may not be able to see through it right now, and that's okay. Just sit with it. Keep looking. Okay, where is the overlay? Where's the processing here? Wow, the whole experience of being a seer and seeing something out there feels like a certain kind of thought or a construct. Like it's being produced again and again and again. Like it has to keep being produced. Once you have that taste, you can start to ask, okay, well, how else can this be experienced? How else can this be seen, if not through the lens of self and other? If not through the lens of here and over there? Very open-ended question. Just open yourself to other possible experiences here, other possible ways of seeing or experiencing. And these are very open-ended, simple questions. If you're thinking about this at this point, that's not what I'm talking about. It's nothing about thoughts or concepts at all. It's not about doctrine either. If you're imagining other kinds of doctrine and imagining how that applies to this, that's not what I'm talking about. You got to go to the experience. Got to go to the scene, the visual. Okay? So then, these simple questions, stick with them until something loosens up. How else could this be experienced right now? I can see how the perspective is created by something, the mind, let's say the mind or thought, doesn't really matter by what, but I can see how it feels not completely primary, like an overlay. Or at least I can consider that it's really not like that. So how else could it be? Again, you're looking right into experience for this, almost like you're looking through that view. Or maybe you're looking from the other side of the view. Or maybe you're looking from everywhere at once. But don't try those on or try to paste them onto experience. Just stay open. How could this be? How else could this be? Other than subject-object, other than here and there. Just let it kind of crystallize or materialize into experience. It might feel very granular at first, ephemeral, impossible even. The mind might just be going, there's no way. There's no way it's like that. There's no way I'm here and there at the same time or whatever. Don't worry about the doubts. Keep going back out to experience. See how long you can stay there. What if you don't check back in with the mind? Do you need to check back in? Stay in the experience. Let the experience just be all there is. Do this for as long as you want to. I would suggest getting somewhat comfortable here to where you, even if it's not obvious how this could be without a subject and object, there's definitely an ability to stay in experience, in the directness of it, without overlaying a self and other in the most fundamental way. Get used to that. It's that kind of neutrality that you know clearly with awakening, but it's not in the mind. It's not the neutrality of consciousness. It's a different kind of neutrality, a subtler neutrality. It has that flavor, perhaps. Stay with that. It might get very quiet. The mind might just stop. Just stay there. Now, once you're more comfortable here, you can add a few other questions if you want to. You can say, where does subject turn into object? Or where does object turn into subject? But I want you to stay in the visual. So explore it. See if you can find any point that has that kind of polarity to it. Is there an in-between? If you follow the subject out to the object and the object back to the subject, are you really moving anything? Is anything being moved? Or is the thought or visual image in the mind sort of changing? Is the perspective overlay trying to fluctuate to accommodate the question? You can also ask yourself, where is non-distance? Where is no distance? Right back into that visual experience. Stay there. Where is no distance? How is no distance? And a third question you can work with. Engaging simply what's seen here. Notice the peripheral aspect of vision and notice the central aspect of vision. And ask yourself, without an overlay of subject and object, how do I even distinguish? In the periphery, we often perceive that there aren't defined things or objects or something we're interested in, perhaps. And yet, in the central visual field, we perceive that that's something we're interested in, something we're engaged with, something out there, an object. But where's that information in the visual experience? So regarding the peripheral and the central, is there any extra information in the central that says, hey, there's an object here, there's something here, and you're over there, and this is over here? Explore that. The last thing I'll offer, and this may or may not relate to other questions I've asked, but in all of these, I don't know, qualia of experience or quanta of experience in the visual field, the peripheral, the central, the colors, the forms, shapes, is there anything that indicates apartness? Or is there anything that indicates distance? Look around and see. And if you keep not finding it, that's fine. Don't just conclude, oh, there's nothing, there's no distance, and then start thinking about it. That's not what we're doing. If you find, oh, no distance there, no distance here, no far, no near, no peripheral, no central, or at least nothing that's distinctly suggesting that in experience, that's the key. Just keep going, keep at it, stay out there. Once you get the feel of this, it's just more of the same approach. Now, the one caution I'll give you aside from thinking, and again, by the time you're working at this level, hopefully you've distinguished the difference between thoughts and concepts and actual experience. But the other caution I want to give is, even without realizing it's a thought, it's easy to overlay an expectation, or perhaps not overlay, but judge our experience versus an expectation. And a lot of times it'd be an expectation based on listening to me or someone else who points in this way. And that's just a subtle form of doubt. Don't worry about the expectations. Go to the experience. It'll show you everything you need to know. I hope this was helpful. It's not just listening to a video. This you got to take off the YouTube mat. You don't have to do it while you're meditating, but do it purposefully, without distraction. I want everyone who watches this, everyone on this channel, to see the world without the lens of perspective. That's my wish for you. That's my New Year's wish. Happy New Year.